So the dream for many companies, of course, is going public, the IPO. So in the initial public offering, the venture would file with the SEC, which is quite a laborious and technical process because they've run it as a private company. Then there are some terms that we use all the time. One is a primary offering, simply meaning it's the first time securities is offered to the public. Then there's a secondary market, which is sale of used or previously issued securities. So the investment banker plays an essential role in this because they're experts. It's not that they're inexpensive, they're expensive, but they are expert, undeniably. So they help you in thinking through your strategy, if to go public and when. And then when it comes time to go, they will help pull the entire process together, which can take months or years to ready a company and go through the actual IPO process. So what they have that is invaluable is they have a network of buyers, institutional buyers, who have money to invest in new securities. Because of that, they have a lot of power and leverage and value to you because you may want to raise $100 million, but how do you go about finding $100 million worth of capital? Well, investment bankers do that for a living. They've done it for decades and they have great relationships with many investment management firms and institutional buyers, so they have an access to those types of buyers for your security. Secondly, there's the what we call traditional IPO pricing, which gives them tremendous power. Investment bankers can direct much of the activity of who you talk to. Of course, you as a company can offer additional ones, but they're driving the ship because that's their business. Furthermore, they set the price. At the end of the long roadshow period, they will then build the book and set the price. And that is a kind of secret process where clients are not in the room. And that's where kind of things get a little murky and troubling for the entrepreneur. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Alternative way is what we call Dutch auction, where it's a more transparent process and investors are from anywhere potentially, could be even general public, and everyone has an equal chance to buy the stock. So a couple of other terms before we move forward. Underwriting spread is the difference between the price of what the investment banker is able to achieve and what they pay to the issuing firm. So in a transaction, the iBank may promise, say, $12 a share, and it goes public at $14 a share, and there is a spread for the investment banker and their syndicate. Then there's a red herring disclaimer, and this is where we put this out as information saying that we're about to go public or considering going public, and this is not yet complete, but it's to start the process of getting information to potential investors. Due diligence, as we've seen in venture capital, is also true, even more so for investment banks. They do validation of things you say or things that you believe or they believe. Could be quality of the product, the defensibility of your patent portfolio, the market size, the contract validity between you and your key customers or suppliers. So they have much breadth and incentive to look at contracts with all parties. So this takes, again, a lot of time because it's important to know what you're buying. Next is some additional terms. One is firm commitment. This is where the iBank is so confident that they're going to succeed that they sign an agreement underwriting that they will sell at this price. And that kind of goes along with the spread that we saw on the previous slide. Best efforts is an alternate way to do it where they say we're going to give our best efforts to do this, but it's not as strong and not an assurance that they will buy even if outsiders do not. So that's kind of a second level of confidence and assurance for the company. IPO underpricing is the tendency and incentive for an investment banker to sell it at a lower IPO price than what the true market price would be. And they do this because it ensures that their buyers will get a little bit of bump, a little bit of profit from the very first moment they own the stock. Stated again simply, if the IPO price is 14, but the IPO price is known by the investment banker as being a bit lower than what the market price will be, let's say the investment banker thinks the market price will become $18 and they sell it to you for 14. Well, there's a built-in gain for you. So you can sell after one day and make $4 on a $14 investment. That's pretty good. That's between a 30 and 40% rate of return in one day. You annualize that and you get a big number. So that's the incentive for underpricing, is that The buyer of that security, institutional investor, says, oh boy, I get some locked in profit. And the investment banker says, oh boy, I'm sure people will buy it. The only person that is not saying, oh boy, is the company, because they're now selling for 14 when they should be selling at 18. So that's what we mean by underpricing. This is a common lament of the entrepreneurs because they work so hard, and these people that just own the stock for one day and own stock because they happen to be buddies. That's kind of the fear, is that they're buddies of the investment bank and they have built-in profit from just holding stock for one day. So that tension in an investment banking pricing scenario. Next, we look at New York Stock Exchange requirements, and it's more strenuous than the requirements for the Nasdaq. And that's partly due to a couple things. First is NYSE has always been considered the blue chippers or the big board, and it's considered you've made it. This is where people aspire to be traded on the big board, on the NYSE. And because of that, they tend to have tighter requirements, which means higher number of shares and market capitalization, and their fees are higher. So NYSE has been a place historically where you went public perhaps at a smaller venue like a Nasdaq or over the counter or the American Stock Exchange. And then when you grew up and matured, then you can deserve and want to get listed on the big board. So there used to be kind of a stepping stone of public companies ending up at the NYSE. The reason I'm saying in that fashion is that there's a new kid, not maybe so new, a new major player in the scene, and that's Nasdaq. Nasdaq requirements are less stringent in terms of size of company and market capitalization, and they have different methods by which you can go public and be listed. So they're much more flexible, more friendly, if you will, to smaller companies going public. And so that's why for years it's been kind of a cozy relationship. You go public on NASDAQ, you grow, become established, and then you get listed on NYSE, and then now you have access to even more and more serious institutional investors. Well, that broke down because some NASDAQ companies, notably companies like Intel and Microsoft, were saying, well, I don't need to go to the big board because I can market because of the strength of Intel without having to pay higher fees and whatnot. People want to invest in Intel even if it's only traded on the NASDAQ. So they started the trend of going public on NASDAQ and never leaving. So this was much to the chagrin of the New York Stock Exchange. And we're going to have guest speakers next week that will be talking about this situation of kind of how NASDAQ can position itself and how it's able to be so successful in going public for most high-tech companies go public using NASDAQ. So if you're trying to prepare for an IPO, the first general idea is if you're preparing for an IPO, act like one for at least a year, if possible, before you go public. What do I mean by act like one? Well, that means you would have employees that if someone looks at their resumes and experience and accomplishments, they look like a public company set of senior management. It also means that your processes, your revenue projections, your profit projections are starting to have more rigor, and you can show a track record of creating a target and hitting or exceeding your target. That is going to be how you're measured as a public company. So you should get used to the rigor and importance of setting good numbers and then not missing. Because one of the worst things that happen for a new company is to miss their estimates, and they lose the confidence of the analyst community and the market, and their prices for their shares will drop. So you want to go public, and when you go public, you want to show and through historical patterns and your post IPO performance that you can set numbers and hit them. So that's what we mean. And so one of the things we look at for IPO is the due diligence and what's going to happen. We're going to have a lot of scrutiny. So everything inside the company will now be exposed. Things like your salary or your shares of options you hold or your bonuses. And this was something a lot of companies and individuals don't want to do, but it's required by the SEC. When you get a proxy statement along with your annual report, you see that senior management compensation is a required disclosure, and that makes people nervous for obvious reasons. And what will happen also is that entrepreneurs will now know that they can't just talk as freely because you cannot provide information that advantage one group over another. So the words are more chosen, is less casual conversation one-on-one. It's more through press releases or conference calls. So you run your life as a CEO of a private company very differently than if you are a public company. So the steps that you would follow if you wanted to pursue the IPOs, you want to set up the organization meeting. That's kind of a term of art here, where you bring together the team, and the team is not your corporate attorney who does contract law. No, it's an SEC attorney. It's not some consultant you bring in. No, it's people that are securities experts, and it of course involves an investment banker who you probably don't have on retainer until you choose to go public. So it's an expensive, very technical, and a serious process. So then you would draft the activities, and that again is led by your attorneys, your CPAs, and your investment banker. And then there's an initial review by the SEC because you're starting the process of getting their approval so that you could file the S1. Then we have pre-marketing, which is this red herring and other prepping of the institutional investors that something's coming. Then there's a marketing that we affectionately or not affectionately call the road show, where people hop on planes and the investment banker and the CEO and perhaps the CEO and CFO will present to institutional investors and hopefully get them interested enough to bid or express interest to the investment banking syndicate. Then there's a pricing and closing, which we mentioned previously. IPOs take a lot of time. So this is going through those steps we talked about on a timeline. So this is a 14-month process, and this is highly variable. There's no magic to 14 months. It could be a little faster or it could be longer. So, but the point is that there's a lot of prep work, a lot of technical, legal, and regulatory and financial work necessary. How's the price determined? This is a very common question asked. So I mentioned the traditional IPO pricing and the systematic underpricing. So how does that happen? Well, you pick the investment bank, you went on the roadshow, and then the day before you go public, you do what's called build the book. The book is simply a list of investors, the amount of shares, and the price that they will pay for their shares. And this book is highly competitive, and everyone wants to be on the book because the iBank has shown over time that they systematically underprice, and if you can get in at the IPO price, there's a high likelihood you're going to make some money. And this is done without the client in the room. Probably very painful for the client to be in the room. And then on the day of the offering, those people on the book get their money or pay their money and get their shares, and they can hold and sell that day, or they could be longer term holders. So the question is, how does the investment banker set the price? And the answer to that is through solicitation of people they previously talked to on the roadshow, and they, in their judgment, set a price. Next, is it high or low? As mentioned earlier, they are systematically underpricing the securities, and that's by design because they want to create incentive for people to be anxious to buy the stock at the IPO price. And who gets those shares? It would be institutional investors, and there was a very visible case with a person by the name of Frank Quattrone with Deutsche Bank. And Frank Quattrone had this list of friends of Frank, and he would allocate them to individuals. So in addition to the major money managers in the world, there were some allocations made to friends of Frank. The coincidence is that I went to school with Frank Quattrone, and we actually played on the same championship intramural volleyball team. And I was never a friend of Frank. I never got money or shares allocated to me. I guess we weren't close enough for me to be on his very private list. And he was prosecuted for that, and he was fighting. And I believe at the end he was found innocent. I'm not sure about the outcome, but it went on for years because the allegation was that he was using it similar to bribing people, and that you would get on that list if you're a CEO or a CFO of a promising startup, and he would feed you shares individually so you could make money personally. And so when it came time for you to choose an investment banking firm, that you would choose Frank and Deutsche Bank. So that was the allegation. And the part that makes it very, very cloudy is that particular practice of granting influential people access to being on that allocation had been going on for decades, and investment bankers have had full discretion and sole discretion for years and have been doing that. So Frank got caught partly because he made so much money, and Deutsche Bank was so successful in Silicon Valley that it gained a lot of attention. All right, so is there a better way or more fair way to do pricing? Well, there's this idea of the Dutch auction, and this particular method is where we let people bid to buy shares. And by people, I mean anybody. And then you set the price so that the ones that bid the highest would get the shares. And so that creates an immediate incentive. So if you don't bid high, forget it, you're not going to get the shares. So that creates an upward pressure on the price. And then the mechanics, which I'll show you in a moment in Excel, you rank order the highest to lowest, and then you set the number based on the lowest in the range that you set for. And then everyone in that group that bid that amount or more would get it at that same price. So if you bid high, you probably won't pay that amount. It just makes you high on the list. The price will actually be set by who in the group is the lowest price, and you get the benefit of that lower price. So that's a Dutch auction. And it's used in other business settings as well, not just in this particular IPO event. The result is the money raised for the company tends to be higher, and the company gets more of the money. The price would then have less built-in profit for the owners of the IPO prices, and everyone who gets that bid gets some shares. They might not get their full requested amount, but they would get some shares. So there's pretty strong incentive to do so. So the question is, has anyone done this? The answer is yes, of course. And here's a list. First of all, in the upper left-hand corner, you see W.R. Hambrecht & Co. And this is the most active investment banker that does what we call open IPO, or that's what their brand name is for an auction-style IPO. And all of these companies were using their open IPO methodology. And you can see the names, and you may know some of them. Google, for sure, you know. And Google did not do their entire offering using the auction method. They did some of it. And they did that to allow the general public to have access to Google stock right at the IPO event. But Overstock, which is a large e-commerce company, or Freddie Mac, which is a governmental entity that does mortgages, or perhaps you know Peet's Coffee. You know, they raised $30 million using open IPO. So it has been done by companies you know, and obviously companies that are much smaller you don't know, but is not at all the predominant practice. It is done infrequently, and the reason is there's so much power held by the investment bankers that they deliver results using their old method, and companies are willing to take a lower price with a higher probability of being successful in the IPO. That's just the reality of business. So you want to see how it works? So let's build a scenario, then I'll do the math for you. So in a Dutch auction, you have an objective. The objective is this company wants to raise $30 million, and they would like to have a maximum dilution of 20%. They like less, of course, but they'd like to accomplish $30 million for less than 20%. So then you go through the process and you get bids. And let's say we have 5 bids, and Fidelity offers a million shares, offers to buy a million shares at $10. So they said, I will give you $10 million for a million shares. John Q. Public, who may be a customer of yours, wants to buy some, and they lob in a offer at $19 a share for 1,000 shares, $19,000. Obviously, not an institutional sized investment. The whole pension plan is in at $12. Warren Buffett is in for 500,000 shares at $9. And my co-customers themselves want to buy because they love the product so much, and they come in at 15. So the idea is, like, how do you sort this all out? Who gets the shares? What is the right price? And how do you kind of accomplish all these things simultaneously? And I'm going to show you this using an Excel sheet. All right, so I've just cut and pasted this into Excel, and the top left-hand corner here shows the data that we've just seen, and then the requirement is to set the price and allocate shares. So there are 4 steps we'll go through. One is let's rank the bids as received from high to low. Number 2 is to then examine the constraints and see where it settles out to raise the total dollars within a maximum percentage dilution, then allocate the shares using that methodology, and then step back and say, is that okay, or do we want to overwrite? And we'll explain why there's judgment involved. It's not purely a mathematical exercise. So first, let's rank. This is mathematical exercise. These are the companies, and these are the price per share, but notice the order is from high to low. So John Q. Public had a very small amount of shares, but that person or company was at 19, so they're the highest. Warren Buffett, not surprisingly, being a value investor, is the lowest to bid at 500,000 shares. The next step, and this part is the mechanical piece, and if you do this properly using this form, the process will just take care of you. So let's just shade that. All right, so 1,000 shares, if you only wanted $19,000, you could just sell to one person. John Q. Public will pay you $19 a share. 1,000 shares, you raise $19. Oh, but we don't want that. We want 30 million. So we're nowhere near. So next level, well, what if we went to just $15? Well, Myco will buy for 15. John Q. Public would be happy to buy at 15 because they were willing to buy at 19. So if you set the price here at 19 or 15, you would sell 1 million plus 1,000 or 1,001,000 shares at 15, and you raise 15. Oops, that's not enough. We need to raise 30 million. So let's go down and include held pension. That's at 12. So now we're up to 2,001,000 shares at $12 is 24 million. We're getting closer, but we want to raise 30. So oops, we have to go pay more. Next, Fidelity. They're at 1 million shares at 10. And of course, anybody above would be happy to pay 10. So now we're up to 3,001 at $10 a share is coincidentally $30 million, $10,000. And so does that meet our objective? The answer here is yes. So this is the line that meets our first objective, which raised 30 million. So next we want to say, okay, let's look at the constraints that we've established. So we say, at this amount, how many shares do we offer? Well, the maximum dilution is 20%. So the number of shares we would issue would be raised. So it's 20 million shares, which is currently outstanding, divided by 80% means that we could have up to 25 million shares total outstanding. The current outstanding shares is 20, so we could issue new shares of another 5 million shares. In this particular case, we're raising the money with only 3 million shares, so we're issuing fewer shares than our max. So we're in good shape because this number is smaller, so we meet the objective of 30 million without blowing through our maximum dilution of 5 million shares. So there's no problem. So things are looking good. So next we say, well, who gets the shares? The way we do this is we say, what is the total amount that we want to raise? And that's the numerator. That's $30 million. How much would we raise if we set the price at 10? What is the cumulative amount if everyone got it at 10? That number that we saw above, you may remember this one, is 30,010,010, comprised of 3 million shares at 10, and then this 1,000 share at 10, right? So that's how we get to 30,010,000. Now, that as a percentage is a pretty high percent, 99.97. So the allocation is very simple. You put the people in rank order of who's in the winning group, and that's these 4 down to 10, and you know how much they wanted, but the cumulative is more than you're going to issue. So you use this percentage, and you allocate that percent for everybody. So the idea is that regardless of what you bid initially, you get your pro rata percentage. And so this is the issue. And that leads to a total of 3 million shares at $10, $30 million. All right, so the next question is that okay? Is that what you want? The answer is no, because we have this guy we cut out. We cut out Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett had offered $9 a share, and since he was below 10, he wasn't going to get any shares. Well, what happens if we let him in? Let's just play around with that. So here we have the same 4, but we're going to add Warren Buffett. And we use the same exercise. How many shares? What's the cumulative number of shares? And that number would be 3,501,000. But now the price would be different. So in order to get Warren Buffett in, you'd have to sell at 9, not 10. And of course, everyone would be happy to buy at 9. So if you take a reduction now to $9, put this in, $9 per share, then the total raise would equal 3,501,000 times $9. Answer is 31,509,000. Well, that's not okay because now we've raised more money than we wanted. So we're going to dilute the company more than our objective. So here on the top is what is the percent that is raised. So if we want 30, which is our initial target number, so we want 30, and we would raise 31 million if we sold it to everybody in the amounts they wanted, then what fraction should everyone get? The answer is 95.2, which is simply 30 divided by 31. And so now we take that percent and we put this in each investor's row, and the allocation is 95% of what you wanted. So for the first investor, they want to buy 1,000, but we said you can have 952, so you won't get 1,000. But the good news is instead of paying 19, which you were willing to pay, you only have to pay 9. And they would say, woo, we're good, right? And the same thing holds for everyone else. They're going to get 95.2% of what they wanted, but at a price more favorable than what they had bid. And Warren Buffett gets exactly the number, the $9, but doesn't get all the shares that he would have liked. He wanted 500,000, and he's going to get 476. But the objective is met. We get to raise our target number of $30 million. Now, step back again and say, what happens here? So let's say you're Warren Buffett. No, let's say you're Fidelity. Fidelity wanted 1 million shares. They only got 952. They were willing to pay 10, and the price is 9. So at the first tick, right when the IPO is live, would they be willing to pay $10 a share, let's say, to make the math easy, for just the 48,000 more shares that they wanted? Well, yeah, because they wanted 1 million shares. They only got 952. So, of course, if they could get more shares that are at $10, they're happy to do that. And arguably, they would be willing to pay more than $10 because they were willing to pay $10 million to get their shares. So what we're seeing is a little built-in demand, right? So for all the people that did not get 100% of the shares they wanted at that price or at even a higher price, they now have some extra money that was, earmarked to some extent to go toward this investment. So that creates an immediate little uptick in value or demand. That doesn't even count all the other people now that can buy the shares, all the other institutional investors that were below on that list, or all the people around the world who are now retail customers that can buy anything on the open stock market. So that's why there's a built-in gain. Part of it from the inherent underpricing by just a little bit in this case through the auction method, and the demand now that the whole world can have access to these shares. So this is the upward pressure that the investment bankers who use open IPO or auction-based pricing would argue to their investors and say, okay, you got the value for the amount you wanted, and there's a little bit of upward pressure, so it's not like it's going to be flatlined. It still will go up. So that's the logic and some of the mechanics of auction method IPO. So wrapping up for chapter 15, harvesting, we looked at an exit strategy, and it's something you should be very thoughtful about from even the beginning of your venture. Systematic liquidation is where you just run the business for cash flow and you get money as it becomes available and sell it or distribute it to your owners. 3 is outright sell. You could sell this to a outside entity. You could sell it to your managers through an MBO. And so we have leveraged buyouts and MBOs as ways to finance the outright purchase. The IPO is the target for a lot of people, and we talked quite a bit about how the process works, who's involved, and how the pricing occurs. And finally, we looked at the role of an investment banker, obviously the key player in the entire process to enable a private company to be publicly traded. So they have a high level of expertise and credibility and control, but they use it to their advantage and the advantage of their clients. So that's it for chapter 15, and I'll see you in class.